Welcome to Ambleside Flourish, brought to you by Ambleside Schools International. This is our series on the pursuit of maturity with Dr. Bill St. Cyr, Executive Director of Ambleside Schools International, hosted by Ambleside School of Colorado. Part 2 continued.
Second developmental task. And you can see how these build on the earlier ones, to recognize and pursue a variety of deep satisfactions. Now, you can do that if you've been given a big world when you were an infant. The difference between deep satisfactions and thrills, I mean, some of you have heard me talk about, we have two pleasure centers in the brain. One oriented towards thrills, roller coaster rides, sex, horror films, all appeal to the thrill centers of the brain. You get that adrenaline rush. Of course, one of the things is, for instance, crack cocaine targets specifically the thrill pleasure centers of the brain. That's why it's such a potent, addictive drug. That's why you feed rats crack. They'll just sit there and eat crack and not drink water and not eat, and they'll just die. Why? Because they don't want to move away from that which is targeting the pleasure center of their brain. That's why it's so destructive. Goes directly to the pleasure centers of the brain, and people who are on crack will prefer that to anything else. Nothing else competes. But that's the thrill center of the brain. Very, very different from the deep satisfaction center of the brain, in which, let's talk about deep satisfactions. They're much more complex. The deep satisfaction is when you make a really good golf swing, and you've worked, and it just goes long and straight right down the middle of the fairway. Or when you have just finished a great book. Or when you stand on a mountaintop and look over a horizon and are struck by the awesome beauty of it. And it just lingers there. A fine glass of wine. A really good conversation. These kinds of things are deep satisfactions. When you push yourself, and it's a new career, personal best on the 10K run. All these very different neurochemistry between a deep satisfaction and a thrill. And it's the deep satisfactions, actually, that make for life. And as one writer said, Americans have an addiction to adrenaline. And part of it is we make this mistake. We've made this mistake with our children. When they're in the child development level, instead of recognizing that what they really will thrive on is deep satisfactions, we try to give them thrills. So it's Disneyland rather than the camping trip with Dad out into the woods for the weekend. When Mary Ellen was teaching fourth grade, in Atlanta, she did this. She asked all of her students, write down the most meaningful experience you ever had with one of your parents? Said each of the students. And then had them fold it and put it in their desk. And then the parents came in for a parent-teacher night, had them all sit in their student's desk. And then she said, told them the question she had given the students, and then invited them to open their child's desk and read what their child had written. Now, this was a very affluent community. So these are children who swam with the dolphins, climbed active volcanoes. The 10-year-old where the two stretch limos pull up after school to take them to the Four Seasons in Atlanta for high tea, and they've rented 4 suites for the weekend, right? And none of that appeared in any of the children's notes. It was always the time Dad and I walked along the beach together. When he helped me fix my bicycle. When Mom and I made that chocolate cake for my younger brother's birthday. Now, what's the difference? You see, those are all deep satisfactions as opposed to thrill. But we've been marketed these thrills, and in one sense, they're easier because, like, Disney does all the work. All you got to do is get on a plane and show up to the gate. You know, so, but we've been marketed all these thrills, and I'm not against them. You know, I'm not saying don't go to Disney. I mean, it's like dessert. You know, it's okay to have dessert periodically. In fact, it's a positive, good thing. Thrills are not bad. I'm not saying that. But the substance of life, the meal, are the deep satisfactions. And one of the developmental challenges for children, this is what's they're supposed to have a variety of deep satisfactions, but which they only know about if they've been given them. I mean, no one loves a walk in the woods who's not been on a walk in the woods with somebody else who loves being there with them. No one loves a starry night who hasn't gone outside with someone who loves a starry night and they're talking about the stars. Developmental task, recognize and pursue a variety of deep satisfactions. That's why broad curriculum is so integral to what we do here. That's why everyone learns to sing, everyone learns art, everyone learns history and math and nature study, because they're all to become deep satisfactions. I love a good history book on the beach. Right? That's as good as it gets. I'm exaggerating a little bit. There are. You know, if I didn't say walking side by side with my wife along the beach is as good as it gets, I'd be in trouble. No, which, in truth, is better than a book. Another child development task, knows self and takes responsibility for communicating self. This is actually, I mean, to know what's happening inside of me rather than just reacting. See, here's the thing. When we're functioning at an infant level of maturity, which is all of us some of the time, we respond out of our own stuff, and we're not even aware of what we're really responding to, and we then make up a story that explains it and makes us look good. So you come in and I'm going down the hall and you brush in front of me. And negative emotion arises in me and I take it out on you. And then I make up a story that it's because you were so rude and came in front of me. When in point of fact, I was frustrated when I started down the hall. Right? The old kick the cat scenario. You know, mom or dad's been working hard all day, comes home, the cat runs and had a rough time with the boss. The cat runs across the sidewalks. You're going through the door and you kick the cat. And it's because that cat's so annoying. No, it had nothing to do with the cat. It had everything to do with the frustration that I didn't process well from work. That's the kick the cat scenario. Well, actually, this is a child-level developmental task, to become aware of what's actually happening in me. So I'm not just making up stories that sound good. I'm actually becoming aware of what happens. And again, this can only happen in relationship with somebody who knows how to do it. Someone who pauses and is not upset and angry and saying, now, what's really going on with you? And allows me to pause, practice what's called mind sight. We could spend a whole hour just on the concept of mind sight, in which I begin to really know my own mind and know your mind, and we actually start to get real with one another. Knows self and takes responsibility for communicating self. Boy, this just might take more than 3 talks. All right, I'm going to move on to adult, and then we're going to call it a night, and we'll save elder and cultivating habits of maturity and some other things for next time. Adult level of maturity. The primary task: take care of 2 people simultaneously. Cares for self and others simultaneously in a mutually satisfying relationship. Now, this is surprisingly hard to do. And all too frequently we're faking it. To actually, for me to be aware of who you are and who I am, and to be working for your best interest while respecting who I am at the same time, that is actually a very complex task and can only be done well if you've actually mastered the infant and child level tasks. And I was given some thought of this on the plane. Why is it so difficult? And here's my reflections. Intimacy, the real deal, is extraordinarily difficult. And I can't really take care of you and me simultaneously unless we've cultivated emotional relational intimacy, so that I know you and you know me and I know who I am with you and who you are with me. And that's actually a very difficult thing to do. By intimacy, I mean, I see you and I embrace you, and I let you see me and embrace me. That's hard. That's hard. Now, I'll talk about me here. And I'll start by saying, like most men, I find that intimacy tends to disorient me. No, not the faking it. I can fake it quite well. But real intimacy tends to disorient me. And there's part of me that wants to avoid it. You see, in many ways, I'd rather a negotiated truce than real intimacy. I'll talk about with Mary Ellen. I'd rather, part of me, and I'm not saying this is the best, but there's part of me that would prefer a negotiated truce. I want clear job descriptions. Okay, you do this, and I do this, and we got a win-win here. I want a peaceful working alliance and occasional good times. Yeah, there's part of me, this is what I want, right, in terms of, I want clear job descriptions, a peaceful working alliance, and occasional good times. But like me really seeing you and knowing you and you really seeing me and me really embracing you and you really that's disorienting. Why? And so, now, I practiced mind sight here, right? Try to really understand what's going on inside of me when I think about this. Here's what I came up with. And they're not necessarily in order. One, I'm afraid that I'll not be able to do what I want to do. Right? That's, to the extent that that's true, that's a failure to complete the peacefully accepting no part of infant development. But so I'd rather negotiated truce so that I can make sure I'm going to get this part of what I want to do, and I'll trade away potentially this. But there's part of me that's afraid that if I really was to be consistently 100% an adult with Mary Ellen all the time, two people caring for each other simultaneously, that I wouldn't be able to do what I wanted to do. In other words, the no problem. That I'd have no and no joy, right? Instead of no peacefully accepted. So that's one issue. Second, I'm afraid that I'll be abused. In other words, not physically, obviously, but that if I were really to do this thing of I know you and you know me and I embrace you and you embrace me, you'll actually punch me in the gut and take advantage of me. There's a little bit of that somewhere down inside that's there. Third, I'm a little afraid that I won't be cherished. Meaning that if you really saw me, there's part of me you would have contempt for. You wouldn't really embrace me, cherish me, know me, and be glad that you know me. And finally, if I tell the truth, I'm lazy and intimacy is hard work. Right? So we get to see that, at least from my perspective, why this task of being an adult is actually kind of hard. I mean, if you're really going to... Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here because I feel pretty good about speculating on the male side of the equation, but I'm going to take some distant jabs at... Not as much, because I dare not try to practice mind sight completely with persons who don't possess a Y chromosome. But here's an observation. And of course, this is just speaking about people I've had in my counseling office. Nobody I actually know well. But women crave intimacy, long for it. But here's my question. Do they actually want intimacy with the clod across the table? Or, who is so very difficult? And I think there's a tendency for women to want intimacy with a version of themselves that would happen to have a Y chromosome. And dealing with the actual clod across the table, they want intimacy, but maybe not really with that. Even though men are likely to be berated for not providing enough of the kind of intimacy that I'm describing here. So, taking care of two people simultaneously is actually a hugely complex, difficult thing to do that takes a lot of growing up and a lot of maturity and a lot of support in a supportive community. By the time I become a mature adult, I need to be able to be emotionally stable in difficult situations. That I can handle emotional distress and not go into major brain dysfunction. I mean, we all know what brain dysfunction looks like, right? Somebody, perhaps ourselves, though we usually don't, it's very, very difficult to recognize when you're in brain dysfunction at the moment you're in brain dysfunction, but pretty much everybody around you knows you're in brain dysfunction. Because your response seems all so logical and so warranted. But to actually be in a stressful, difficult situation and stay your best self. A mature adult takes responsibility for how actions affect others, contributes to the sense of community and who we are together, and can express their own sense of who they are and what their role is in an ever clearer and effective and positive way within the community. This is not an easy thing, particularly in a culture in which the vast majority of biological adults are functioning at infant and child levels of maturity. But it is what we're called to. And it's very difficult to reach parent level of maturity, which we'll talk about next time, if I have not achieved adult level of maturity. And I would want to put on a side here, one of the keys is to begin, I'll give you two things that we need to be continually working on. One is mind sight. That is to be aware of what's really happening inside me and to tell the truth about it. And to humbly seek to be aware of what's happening in other people. And to graciously, not always speak it out, but just to be aware. It seems that what our verbal logical explainer, that's the left prefrontal cortex, what our verbal logical explainer tends to do when we get in crisis situations is to cover our backsides. And so we don't even realize it's happening, but we're in a distressful situation, and our verbal logical explainer starts to make up a story that explains precisely why we're the good guy and why who's ever the precipitating agent is the bad guy. That's what our verbal logical explainer does almost habitually. And to move forward into greater levels of more consistent adult maturity, and the truth is, with everyone in here will spend a certain percentage of the time at adult level maturity, and some percentage of the time under certain circumstances at child level maturity, and maybe even occasionally at infant level of maturity. So this is not I've now reached adult level maturity, so at all times in any circumstances I function at adult level maturity. Now, what we're talking about is percentages here, so that more and more consistently I function at an adult level of maturity. Not, ask Mary Ellen, and she will tell you that I can, believe it or not, function at an infant level of maturity. Now, I'm pretty good at hiding it. And you'd have to really know me well to recognize when it was happening. And by God's grace, I tend to recognize it myself now and laugh at myself and pull out of it relatively quickly. But there's always the verbal logical explainer that wants to write a story and justify. I am acting at infant level of maturity, but I am writing a story that's telling me and explaining it and makes total sense to me why this is completely justified and absolutely right, and I am actually the only adult in the room, but everybody else around knows that I'm acting at infant level maturity. Anyway, so first thing, to begin to practice mindset, to say, what is really happening with me? I mean, this requires the virtue of humility. As G.K. Chesterton said, original sin is the one empirically verifiable Christian doctrine. We are all sinners. We all get it wrong. So I start with that. And then the second thing is, so that implies mindsight. I know it. I own it. I tell the truth about what's really happening to me. And then second, I learn to process it with somebody who has more maturity skills than I have. And that can be a spouse who sometimes, and one of the beautiful things is, sometimes I'm at one level of maturity and Mary Ellen's at another. And so hopefully we can, if I'm actually humble enough to practice mindsight, she can then help me. Or God. One of the things that I have learned how to do and work on is, if I get into my stuff, I talk to Jesus about it. I actually process it with Him. That's the two things. Mindsight and practicing it with mindsight, and then consistently working on developing the habits of maturity. And we'll talk even about that a little bit more next time.
Thank you for listening to Ambleside Flourishes series on the pursuit of maturity with Dr. Bill St. Cyr, Executive Director of Ambleside Schools International, hosted by Ambleside School of Colorado. Ambleside Schools International fosters an educational renewal based upon the pedagogical insights of British educator Charlotte Mason. Serving an international community of parents, teachers, and schools, Ambleside makes a living education accessible to all. For additional information regarding Ambleside Schools International and training opportunities for principals, teachers, and parents, please visit our website at amblesidschools.com.